who's able to reflect on the passing of the Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. I'm proud to say we're joined on Newzroom Afrika tonight by former President Thabo Mbeki. Mr. President, a very good evening to you. Welcome to the program. If I can get first your initial thoughts upon hearing the news that the Arch was no longer with us.
Good evening, Thembekile. It's a very, very sad day, I think, for all of us, for the whole of South Africa, and many others across the globe. It's certainly for us because we have lost an outstanding leader. We've lost an outstanding leader of our people who was there in the front line of the struggle at the most difficult time. At the most difficult time when people were being killed, children were being killed in Soweto and elsewhere, and all of that, the terrible period during the course of the struggle. He was there. He was there in the front line and would not stand back, wouldn't stand down. Mm-hmm. He was also there in the process of the construction of the new South Africa. I'm speaking here in particular about his leadership of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because that was an important part of dealing with this challenge to build the new South Africa for which he and many millions of our people had struggled. Mm-hmm. But also centrally, he served as a voice of conscience in the process of the building of that new democracy.
And for President, pardon me for jumping in. I just wanted to alert you to the fact that we're expecting an address that appears imminently from the presidency. So if I do jump in, please, apologies for that. It's not to be rude, but let's continue with our conversation while we have you. And I wanted to ask you about the transition. I mean, Desmond Tutu, many don't know, was a qualified educator who then left his role because of his position, his opposition to the apartheid regime and the introduction of Bantu education. And that is what apartheid did, isn't it? It disrupted people at their very core. Absolutely. I mean,
apartheid defined a wrong, very wrong kind of society, wrong in a million ways. It's a system which should never have existed in the first place, but and could never last, because I'm saying it was wrong in every respect. And indeed, therefore, I mean, people like the Archbishop Tutu, who had a very, very direct experience of what apartheid meant, couldn't being a person as inspired as he was inspired by the scriptures and a particular vision that he, a pastor had to work to create not only the world the year after, but also the here and now. And therefore I'm saying that he could not resist to play his own role in terms of the defeat of that apartheid system.
Mm-hmm. Was he the right person to lead a process such as the TRC, given that it dealt with a process of reconciliation, but much of what was heard there was very legal in nature, and people are now saying they blame him for some of the shortcomings that emerged from that process?
No, it can't be. The Archbishop could not be blamed for whatever the shortcomings were. There might have been shortcomings in the design of the process, in which case that we who designed it would then have to take the responsibility for whatever blame. And then, of course, there are many people who were part of the apartheid system who did not come to the Amnesty Committee and do what was required by the law. The fact that you had so many people absenting themselves from that process, it can't be blamed on him either. And indeed, they took their own decisions, the TRC, one of which was to confirm what had been agreed even at the founding of the TRC, that those who had committed crimes and had not been pardoned by the TRC must then face the force of the law. That has not happened as effectively as it should have. I don't think you can blame the Archbishop for that. No, I think the Archbishop and others on the TRC did the best that they could in the circumstance to help in the process of building this new kind of South Africa that we're talking about.
Do you think the TRC fell short of what many people thought it would achieve, what it in paper perhaps was supposed to be and do for South Africans, especially the black majority?
Well, it might have been. I don't think it fell. I don't think it fell short of what it was designed to achieve. I don't think it fell short of that. There might have been wrong expectations out of it. The process of national reconciliation is a remaining challenge. The process of national reconciliation is a remaining challenge for us. But that process of national reconciliation could not be achieved merely through the TRC process. Because fundamental to the achievement of the objective of national reconciliation in our country is the eradication of the legacy of apartheid. And the eradication of legacy of apartheid, of colonialism, was not a task of the TRC. It's a task that government and everybody else had to play post-1994. In terms of the reconstruction of the new kind of South Africa. South Africa is spelled out in our constitution. That hasn't been done as effectively and comprehensively as should have been the case. Again, it's not a fault of the TRC. So there might have been wrong expectations out of the TRC, but I think it did what it could do, and left a legacy, left instructions, directions to be followed, which I think remain relevant.
So that reconciliation now, people are saying, for that to happen, we would need the issue of land addressed, the issue of socio-economic inequality addressed. Is there a single vehicle that can be used to achieve that based on where the TRC fell short?
No, I mean, it's a task of organizations like the ANC that have committed themselves to a particular view about what kind of South Africa we want. It's a challenge of all these political forces in our country to say, what do they do? The Constitution says, as you know, the Constitution says we must create a non-racial society. It says we must create a non-sexist society. That's the Constitution. Now, what are we doing to create that kind of society? Because to create you can't say South Africa is a non-racial society with all of these major inequalities on a racial basis, inequalities in wealth, in income, in access to education, all sorts of things. That task to create a non-racial South Africa rests on the hands of all of us and these political parties which lead us in the country. In the same way as in the creation of a non-sexist society, again, is a responsibility of all of these political players.
Let's circle back to the Arch then as the individual, the activist. You were born yourself into what was already a political family. When did people such as yourself become aware of someone such as Desmond Tutu, who was a religious leader, but still such a big name in that space?
Well, I mean, the Archbishop, before he became an Archbishop, he studied in England. He was in England at a certain time when we were also in England. So we got to know him then. Not so much for, he was not an activist in the way that he became an activist later, but we were familiar with his views. That here was an important preacher, pastor. Our view indeed was that he would become even more important in the church. And we're familiar with his views against apartheid and in fact for change. So, I mean, we knew him in that context already, really more for his views at the time than activism. So that by the time he returned home and became active, it would not have come as a surprise to people like myself who had that familiarity with him when he was still in England. So I'm sure people had met with him at different times, but certainly in our case, It was before he became the kind of activist that he later became.
And how sensitive was the relationship between the clergy and the political activists of the time? Because yes, there were churches where we hear activists were allowed to hide out when apartheid police were looking for them, but there was a difference in approach from some of the activists who wanted to basically fight fire with fire, and you had people like Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu saying, no, let's talk, let's go for the route of peace rather than striking back, as it were.
No, overwhelmingly, the Christian church at a certain point in South Africa was very much involved in the struggle against apartheid. I think you look across all of the denominations, would have been, you had to find the same phenomenon, same sort of engagement. Of course, that many of the church people would have been very wary about some of the forms of struggle, like the armed struggle. But even those who said, well, we don't support the armed struggle, nonetheless, they got involved. They got involved in the struggle because not all of the struggle was armed. In fact, the important parts of the struggle were unarmed. So I think the overwhelming view, really, of the Christian church during a particular time was the way it swung over to say it had a role to play, not just about matters of the year after, but it had an important role with regard to the mobilization of the people to engage in struggle to end the system of apartheid in non-violent struggle. And I think people like Archbishop Tutu, many others, played an important role in that regard.
The Archbishop was also quite critical of the actions of government at a time when you were in charge as far as the handling of the HIV/AIDS crisis at the time and whether it was time to allow people access to antiretrovirals. Did you ever have conversations with him about that part in our history post that? And did he perhaps influence your thinking at all?
No, there was never any occasion when we engaged each other on that particular matter. No, it never came up between us, no.
And in personal relationships, how much of a personal relationship did you have with the Arch, if at all?
No, very regularly in contact, as necessarily as had to be the case during the years of struggle with him in the SACC, playing a role in the UDF, playing a role in the World Council of Churches, in the All African Conference of Churches. Obviously, we were in contact very regularly. And during the years that we were in government, very constantly, all the time. So, no, we've worked with the Archbishop together for many years now.
And do you think South Africa still has, in the public domain, leaders of his caliber?
Well, there is a caliber of leaders, there's a generation of our leaders that I think in many ways are irreplaceable. In this sense that these are people who grew up during the apartheid years and therefore had very intimate knowledge of what that kind of oppression meant and had a very deep understanding of what needed to be done to change that reality. And a very deep commitment, a particular vision driven by particular conscience, who played a particular role. And so you'll have some leaders who come after that, who don't have those sorts of exposures, and therefore the levels of engagement and so on will differ. But I'm sure.
One of the things
I'm sure you will have people who will be as inspired as Bishop Tutu was to make sure that something good happens to this country.
So one of the things that the Arch had said, I think this was in the mid-90s, upon the establishment of the TRC or roundabout, was that that those who forget the past are likely to repeat it. Have we forgotten? And are we repeating?
I think as we have moved away from the apartheid years, indeed there are some in our country who have forgotten what that meant, what apartheid meant, what that system meant in terms of the lives of the people. Indeed, I think there are some who have forgotten that. But maybe in a perverse way, the lessons continue though, because the legacy of apartheid remains with us. So even those who says that, no, I have no experience of white minority rule, sure, they may not, but the society in which we live, the social divisions and then the social tensions and so on, we've inherited those from the past. So it's not entirely possible for people to say, no, we've forgotten what used to happen in the past, because the past continues.
Have you as ANC leaders, past and present, do you think, fully accounted for your respective roles? And I'm saying your respective roles because you were also an ANC head of state. Do you think you fully accounted for your role in the slow progress made and lack of progress in some respects?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we must take responsibility for all of the rights and wrongs and misbehaviors of the ANC. Of course, we're all, as ANC members, particularly the ANC leadership, we're sure all of us are to blame for all of that, must take responsibility. We can explain why things happened in whatever way they happened, but I'm saying we can't run away from the fact that we must take responsibility for whatever it is that has happened in the hands of the ANC.
But without correction, that taking of responsibility means very little to the ordinary South African. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I couldn't hear. Can you repeat that? Your voice disappears.
Oh, I think there might be a bit of a technical issue because I was losing you as well, former President. I was saying the issue with accountability and leaders such as yourself accepting responsibility is unless the party itself shows a fundamental change, it means very little, because Archbishop Desmond Tutu was himself in later years quite critical of the ANC's running of this country.
You are quite right, quite correct. No, the ANC has to look at itself very critically and very honestly, and do the changes that are necessary. I mean, the thing that that the ANC must explain to the public, that we must explain to the public, because if you look at numbers of people accused of corruption in terms of government, even look at the evidence given in terms of the State Capture Commission led by Judge Zondo, many of those people are ANC. So the ANC has got to answer the question. What happened that the ANC became a home for people of that kind, whose purpose was never to respect the value system of the ANC. It was never to serve the people, their intention. It was to serve themselves in all sorts of ways. The ANC needs to explain that to the public. And not only explain it, but to say in a convincing manner, what is it that we're going to do to make sure that we rid ourselves of a problem of that kind? Because that problem has not only remained in the ranks of the ANC, it's had very serious damaging impact on the country. So indeed, as the ANC, we have a responsibility to do all of that.
Former President Thabo Mbeki, good to speak to you tonight, sir, on the passing of the Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. Thank you for your time.